So now we want to think about how a confidence interval for the difference between two proportions works. Now you'll notice that there's no formulas here, just like there weren't for the hypothesis test. That's because the formulas are so convoluted and difficult, they're not really worth our time. Instead, we're going to have StatCrunch do all the heavy lifting for us. You'll notice these requirements to construct the interval are the same as what they were to conduct a hypothesis test. That's all the same. And your point estimate is your difference in your proportions. Now, if you're going to show a significant difference in P1 and P2, that means that the interval must not contain 0. And that's tied back to how hypotheses work in this particular section. The null hypothesis is always assuming that the two proportions are equal to each other, which if they were equal to each other, when you subtracted one to the other side, it would be equal to 0. So if you're going to show that there's a significant difference, then you cannot have 0 in your interval. Right? Because you want to show that they're not equal to 0 when you subtract them, and therefore there is a big difference between the two groups. All right, let's look at an example. Now you notice here, it has these magic words right here. Assume the requirements are met. That means that we're not going to check random, independent, normal, any of that stuff, right? None of that are we going to check, which is hooray. It's less work for us to deal with that. All right, so we want to know if the proportion for rural. Okay, so rural is group 1 and urban is group 2. And you can see right here we have the counts and the totals. And this drives me crazy about um, this particular program is that it doesn't actually line up very well. It kind of drives me nuts. So they say it's the number of successes when you go to type it in, but when they put it in here, they call it count. Okay, sure, fine. So this is X for group 1 and this is N for group 1. And so if you want the p hat for the rural, and the rural was group 1, you want x over n. You want the 550, and you want to divide it by the 1968. And we'll go find that in just a second, but I want to set up the urban as well. That way we can go do both at the same time. So the urban group is right here. That's group 2. So the p hat for urban would be, this is the x for group 2, this is the n for group 2. So it'll be 907 divided by 3118. Okay, so let me go find those decimals with Desmos. So we want to take 550, we're going to divide by 1968. And then we want to take 907 and divide by 3118. And we want to round these to 4 decimal places because it said so in the instructions. So we're going to go 4 decimal places for these. So that would mean 0.2795 for this one and 0.2909 for the urban one. Lovely. All right, so we have our two p hats. There's this one and this one. All right, now the confidence level. Well, the level is a percentage, so if we just read very carefully, we can find it. So the level is right here, right? Same as it was in chapter 9 when we saw these before. So the confidence level is 90%. Well, that was easy. Also easy is the interval. The interval itself is right here because this is the lower and this is the upper. So the lower and the upper, and it says 4 decimal places. So negative 0.0328, comma 0.0099. Wonderful. Okay, now what about the point estimate? Well, the point estimate is the p hat for rural minus the p hat for urban. Um, sorry, the point estimate for this p hat is the p hats. So if we take the p hat for rural, right, so this is the real one, the actual p for rural minus the actual p for urban. This is the population one. But the estimate will be p1 hat minus p2 hat, right? So if we just do that, and it's in the sheet right up here, it tells you, hey, the point estimate is the p hat for the one group minus the p hat for the other group. That's your best guess for the difference in the population proportions. So that would be 2.2795 take away 0.2909. All right, so let me go grab Desmos and find what that is. So 0.2795 minus 0.2909 gets us negative 0.0114. All right, that is the point estimate. Our best guess for the difference in the proportions of motorcycle fatalities for rural and urban areas. All right, what about the margin of error? Well, the margin of error is the distance from the edges to that point estimate. But the easiest way to find it is the way we did it back in the day in chapter 9, which is you take your upper minus your lower and you divide by 2. Now the upper is 0.0099 minus your lower has a negative in it. That's okay, you just write negative. So 0.0099 minus a negative 0.0328. Right? The subtraction from the formula is still there, and then it just happens this number is negative. And then we divide. Okay, so let me grab Desmos and type that in. Now remember, if we want to make a fraction, the easiest thing to do is to hit the fraction button first. Then we take the upper number, 0099, minus the lower number, which was a negative 0.0328, and we divide by 2. Now, some of you are very savvy, and you might realize, hey, when you minus a negative, that's the same thing as adding. Yes, indeed. So it works out either way, but it's 0.0214 if we're rounding to 4 decimal places. So that's what we will do. And there we have it. Now, does this interval, right, the interval, remember, was this, right, the negative 0.0328 to the positive 0.0099. Does that imply there's a significant difference in the percent of motorcycle fatalities involving drivers under the influence in rural and urban areas? Okay, so let's think about this for a second. We think that the difference in the proportion of fatalities for rural and urban areas, anywhere from negative 0.0328 to positive 0.0099. Somewhere in there, we are 90% sure. Okay, so do you notice what's in that interval? Negative to positive means zeros in here. It's actually kind of closer to this one. Zero's over here. 0 is contained in that interval. 0 is between these two numbers. So there's no way it's this one where it says 0 is not contained. That's wrong. And there's no way it's this one because it says 0 is not contained. That's wrong. So it's got to be one of the two where it says it's contained. Okay, but remember, if 0 is contained, that means that there is not a significant difference because P1 minus P2 equals 0, and 0 is in our frame of reference. So there's not a big difference. And that means that we're going to circle this one. When 0 is contained within the interval limits, that means there is not a big difference in the two groups.